The most effective therapy in modern psychology has a 2,000-year-old secret. We are about to trace the direct lineage of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, back to its surprising birthplace. This is not a story of academic theft, but a fascinating rediscovery of ancient wisdom. By the end of this journey, you will see your own thoughts in a completely new light and understand the timeless tools for mastering them. We will uncover how specific techniques used in therapists' offices today were first forged on the porches of ancient philosophers. How did a treatment for anxiety and depression emerge from a school of thought about virtue and fate? What does it mean when modern science finally confirms what an emperor wrote in his private diary? Are you ready to connect your mind to the distant past? 2,000 years ago, a radical idea took root in the human mind. It was a simple but profound premise that our suffering, our anxiety, our anger do not come from the world itself. They come from the judgments we place upon it. A Stoic philosopher would look at a difficult event, a loss, a setback, and say the pain is not in the thing that happened. The pain is in the story you tell yourself about what it means. This was a complete inversion of how people typically experience life. We feel an emotion, and we assume the outside event caused it directly. Someone insults us and we feel hurt. We fail at a task and we feel shame. The Stoics proposed a hidden middle step. Between the event and the emotion, there is always a silent, rapid judgment. The insult is not what hurts. What hurts is the judgment that this insult diminishes my worth. The failure is not the source of shame. The shame comes from the judgment that this failure makes me incompetent. This insight is the absolute cornerstone, the philosophical foundation upon which the entire structure rests. Now, fast forward to the middle of the 20th century, to the world of psychology just before cognitive behavioral therapy emerged. The dominant views of the human mind were very different. One powerful perspective saw our emotions and behaviors as the product of deep, hidden forces, impulses buried in the unconscious mind from early childhood. Our reactions were seen as symptoms of these deeper conflicts, often mysterious and difficult to access directly. Another common view was more behavioral, suggesting we are simply products of our environment, reacting to rewards and punishments. In both cases, the individual's conscious thoughts, the actual sentences running through their head in the present moment, were often seen as secondary, as mere surface noise. The emotional reaction was treated as a direct, almost automatic response to a trigger, or as the tip of a much deeper iceberg. If you felt a crushing wave of anxiety, the treatment might involve exploring distant memories to find its root, or it might focus solely on changing your outward behavior. The power of your present conscious judgment was frequently overlooked. This is the monumental shift. Stoicism and later cognitive behavioral therapy both place that power squarely back in your hands. They agree on a fundamental map of the mind. The sequence is not event, then emotion. It is event, then thought, then emotion. Your thoughts are the interpreters. They take the raw data of the world and assign it meaning, and it is the meaning you assign that dictates how you feel. Think of it like wearing a pair of glasses with tinted lenses. If the lenses are dark and cracked, the entire world looks dark and broken. The Stoic and the CBT therapist would not just tell you to try and see a brighter world. They would teach you to become aware of the lenses themselves, to question whether those cracks are really in the world or only in the glass you are looking through. This shared premise transforms you from a passive victim of your feelings into an active investigator of your own mind. It turns emotional distress from a mysterious affliction into a puzzle that can be understood, taken apart, and reassembled. Once you accept that your judgments are the source, you hold the key to changing the outcome. The next question, for both the ancient philosopher and the modern therapist, was breathtakingly practical. If our judgments cause our suffering, how do we change them? This crucial question found its answer in the most unlikely of places, a psychoanalyst's office in the 1960s. Dr. Aaron T. Beck was a trained psychiatrist deeply immersed in the Freudian tradition, searching for the unconscious roots of depression in the dreams and childhood memories of his patients. He expected to find hidden anger or deep-seated conflicts from the past, but as he listened, something else entirely began to surface. Beck noticed a pattern that did not fit the established script. His patients were not just passively experiencing a mood, they were engaged in a constant, silent, and devastating conversation with themselves. In the flow of their speech, between descriptions of their feelings and their circumstances, were quick, fleeting, and intensely negative thoughts. These thoughts were not the product of deep analysis. They were automatic. They appeared instantly, as if reflexively, in response to everyday events. A friend walking by without saying hello might trigger the automatic thought, "He hates me." A minor mistake at work would instantly mean, "I am a complete failure." Beck began to call these mental events automatic negative thoughts. They were not deliberate reflections. They were judgments that flashed through the mind like lightning, carrying immense emotional voltage, and yet often operating just below the level of full awareness. The patient felt the resulting wave of sadness or anxiety, but the thought that sparked it remained unseen, like a match struck in a dark room. This was not a theoretical breakthrough Beck had set out to prove. It was an empirical observation, something he witnessed happening in real time. And in that observation, the 2,000-year gap between the Stoic porch and the modern clinic vanished. What Beck was documenting, these automatic negative thoughts, were the precise, mechanical workings of the Stoic concept of judgment. The patient's depression was not being caused by a mysterious force from their childhood. It was being actively constructed, moment by moment, by the automatic interpretations they were placing on their current experience. The thought, "I am a failure," following a setback is not a fact. It is a judgment, an assessment, and just as the Stoics claimed, it is that judgment, not the setback itself, that generates the crushing emotional weight. Beck had stumbled upon the cognitive engine of human suffering. He realized that to treat the emotion, he did not necessarily need to excavate the past. He could instead intercept these automatic thoughts in the present, bring them into the light, and question their validity. This shift was monumental. Therapy could become less about deciphering ancient history and more about learning to read the biased headlines your own mind was publishing in real time. The tool for this new approach was disarmingly simple yet profoundly powerful. It required learning to become a detective of your own thinking. Beck called this discovery the cognitive model, and it became the precise blueprint for a new kind of therapy. He mapped out a clear, repeatable sequence. First, you have a situation, an event. This triggers an automatic thought, that lightning-fast, often unnoticed judgment. That thought then directly produces an emotional reaction, and that emotion drives a behavior, a situation, a thought, a feeling, an action. It was a clinical roadmap for understanding distress. But the moment you see that map, the echo from the past is unmistakable. Centuries before Beck's notebooks, the Stoic teacher Epictetus wrote, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." Read that again, disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. This is not a vague philosophical similarity. It is a direct, point-for-point translation of the cognitive model into ancient Greek. The thing is Beck's situation. The view is the automatic thought. The disturbance is the resulting emotion and behavior. Beck had provided the clinical structure, the step-by-step manual, but the core insight, the revolutionary idea that our suffering is filtered through our interpretations, was already waiting, fully formed, in texts over 2,000 years old. This parallel reveals something profound about the human mind. It suggests we are not looking at a clever historical coincidence, but at a fundamental truth about how our psychology operates, a truth that was independently discovered across vast stretches of time because it is simply how the mind works. The Stoics observed it through introspection and reason. Beck observed it through clinical practice and evidence. They arrived at the same destination because they were following the same trail, a trail built into the very architecture of human thought. So the therapy that would change modern psychology did not have to invent a new theory of the mind from scratch. It found one fully articulated in the philosophical record. The next great challenge was turning this insight into a practical tool. If these automatic thoughts are the problem, how do we catch them in the act? The key to catching these automatic thoughts lies in learning their language. In cognitive behavioral therapy, this language has a name. They are called cognitive distortions. These are not just negative thoughts. They are predictable, habitual errors in thinking, systematic biases that twist our perception of reality. Think of them as faulty software running in the background of your mind, generating flawed reports about the world and yourself. There is catastrophizing, where a single setback becomes a guaranteed future disaster. There is black and white thinking, where everything is either perfect or a total failure, with no middle ground. There is mind reading, where you assume you know what others are thinking, and it is always negative. These distortions are the specific grammar of our internal suffering. A CBT therapist gives a client a worksheet listing these distortions, a checklist to help them identify the exact type of flawed logic they are using in a moment of distress. It is a tool for mental clarity, turning a vague feeling of anxiety into an identifiable thinking error. Now, listen to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal nearly 2,000 years ago. He advises himself to strip away the story you are telling yourself about an event. See it for what it is, objectively, without the layer of judgment. He constantly argues against his own tendency to catastrophize, to add unbearable weight to ordinary hardships. In one passage, he writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." This is not a general pep talk. This is a direct instruction to identify and dispute a cognitive distortion, specifically the distortion that external events have absolute power over our internal state. The Stoic philosopher Seneca spent entire essays dissecting the flawed reasoning behind anger and anxiety. He would take a common thought pattern, like the belief that a certain outcome would be unbearable, and systematically dismantle it, showing how the mind is constructing a false narrative. The Stoics called this flawed reasoning sophistry. It was clever, persuasive, but ultimately false argumentation presented by the mind itself. Their philosophical practice was, in essence, a lifelong training in spotting these sophistries and debating them into silence. So when a modern therapy client uses a worksheet to label their all-or-nothing thinking, they are engaging in the same fundamental practice as a Stoic student identifying a sophism. The terminology is different, but the target is identical. It is the habit of the mind to tell itself convincing but irrational stories. Both frameworks provide a shared vocabulary for this internal noise, transforming it from an overwhelming emotional truth into a recognizable object that can be examined and questioned. This parallel reveals something crucial. Our mental struggles are not random. They follow patterns, and once you know the patterns, you are no longer at their mercy. You can begin the work of correction, but knowing the name of the distortion is only the first step. The real power comes from what you do with that knowledge. The modern solution to catching these thoughts is a practical, almost mechanical tool. In cognitive behavioral therapy, a client is often given a simple piece of homework, a worksheet called a thought record. It is a structured log, a place to pause when a strong emotion hits. The instructions are clear. First, note the situation, what just happened. Then, capture the automatic thought that flashed through your mind in that moment. Next, identify the emotion it created and how intense it feels. Finally, and this is the crucial step, you are asked to write down evidence that supports the thought and evidence that contradicts it. This last column transforms the exercise from mere diary keeping into a courtroom of the mind. You are no longer just a passenger of your thoughts. You are the judge demanding proof. Is the thought, "I am a failure," actually supported by all the facts of your life, or is it a single piece of data being blown out of proportion by a cognitive distortion? This practice builds a new mental muscle, the muscle of metacognition, the ability to think about your own thinking. It creates a tiny space, a breath of awareness between the triggering event and your reaction. In that space lies your freedom to choose a different response. This is not a modern invention. It is a direct descendant of a Stoic ritual known as the evening review. Seneca, in his letters, describes this practice in detail. At the end of each day, he would sit in quiet reflection and ask himself a series of questions. What wrong did I do today? What temptation did I resist? What habit did I strengthen or weaken? He would retrace his steps not to punish himself, but to examine his judgments. When did I become angry, and was that anger justified by the facts or by my own flawed assessment? When did I feel anxious, and what story was I telling myself about the future that may not be true? The Stoic evening review was a structured, daily audit of the mind. It was their thought record. They were catching their automatic judgments, their sophisms, and holding them up to the light of reason before sleep. Marcus Aurelius's personal journal, Meditations, is essentially a published version of this lifelong review. Page after page, he interrogates his own impulses, disputes his own fears, and reminds himself of his core principles. He is doing the work of the evidence column, arguing against his own automatic negative thoughts about power, about other people, about mortality. The shared goal here is profound, and it goes beyond simple stress relief. Both the CBT thought record and the Stoic evening review aim to break the spell of unconscious patterns. Most of our suffering is repetitive. We have the same argument with a loved one, triggered by the same type of comment. We feel the same wave of inadequacy every time we face a certain kind of challenge. These are not random events. They are well-worn neural pathways, automatic programs running on a loop. The daily practice of examination interrupts that loop. It inserts a moment of conscious awareness into an automatic process. By writing it down or reflecting on it, you are telling your brain, this pattern is important. Pay attention. Over time, this does not just help you manage a single bad day. It rewires your default responses. You begin to catch the distortion earlier before the emotional wave fully crashes. You start to recognize the familiar feeling of catastrophizing as it begins, and you can choose in that moment to ask for evidence. This is the cultivation of inner peace, not as a passive state, but as a skilled practice. It is the difference between hoping the storm will pass and learning to read the weather patterns of your own mind. But awareness and analysis are only half the battle. Once you have identified a flawed judgment, what do you actually do with it? How do you move from seeing the problem to installing a better, more rational way of thinking? The most powerful question you can ask is not one that seeks an answer, but one that dismantles a false premise. This brings us to the third and perhaps most elegant tool shared across the ages. In the modern therapy room, after a client identifies an automatic thought like, "My presentation will be a disaster," the therapist does not simply say, "That's not true." Instead, they might say, "What is the evidence that supports this belief?" Or, "What is an alternative, more balanced way of seeing this?" This technique is called Socratic questioning, and it is the engine of cognitive restructuring. The goal is not to argue with the client, but to guide them to argue with their own distorted thought, to become their own defense attorney and prosecutor, weighing the facts of the case. It is a gentle but relentless inquiry that exposes the shaky foundation of a belief built on feeling rather than fact. The therapist's questions act as a lever, prying apart the fused connection between a thought and an emotion, creating that crucial space for reason to enter. This method of guided discovery has a very old and very specific pedigree. It comes directly from the Athenian philosopher Socrates, who famously taught not by lecturing, but by asking a series of probing, logical questions that would lead his students to discover contradictions in their own assumptions. Centuries later, the Stoics adopted this dialectical method as the core of their teaching practice. The Stoic classroom was not a place for passive listening. It was a rigorous gymnasium for the mind. A teacher like Epictetus would engage a student who was distressed about, say, a potential loss of status. Epictetus would not offer comfort by saying, "Don't worry about it." He would begin a line of questioning. Does this thing you fear lie within your control or outside of it? If the student admitted it was outside his control, Epictetus would press further. Then why are you troubled by it? Is it rational to suffer over what you cannot change? The dialogue would continue, step by logical step, until the student's own reasoning led him to see that his distress was based on a flawed judgment about what is truly good or bad. The Stoic dialectic was a live, verbal form of the thought record's evidence column. It was a collaborative process of exposing sophistry, those persuasive but irrational arguments the mind makes to itself. The parallel here is not just thematic, it is methodological. A modern CBT therapist using Socratic questioning is performing the same role as Epictetus with his student. Both are acting as a skilled guide, using questions as tools to help the individual examine their own beliefs from new angles. The questions are designed to bypass defensiveness. When you are told your thought is wrong, you might resist, but when you are led to discover the flaw for yourself through your own answers, the insight becomes yours. It sticks. This process transforms the nature of learning. Wisdom, whether philosophical or psychological, is not something poured into an empty vessel. It is something uncovered within by challenging the structures already there. The Stoic aim to uncover a rational understanding of nature and virtue. The CBT client aims to uncover a more accurate and helpful understanding of their present situation. The path, paved with questions, is identical. Consider a common automatic thought. If I make a mistake, people will think I'm incompetent. A therapist using the Socratic method might ask, has there ever been a time when you saw someone else make a small mistake? Did you immediately decide they were completely incompetent? Usually, the answer is no. The next question might be, what does making this one mistake actually prove about your overall abilities? Or, is it possible people are focusing on their own tasks, not scrutinizing your every move? Each question gently loosens the grip of the absolute catastrophic belief, allowing for nuance and realism to seep back in. This is cognitive restructuring in action, and it is the Stoic dialectic applied to the anxieties of contemporary life. Epictetus was doing the same thing with his students' fears about exile, poverty, or reputation. The content of the fear changes, but the faulty cognitive architecture, the overestimation of threat, the personalization, the black and white conclusion remains constant across millennia. The therapeutic question and the philosophical question are both tools for debugging that ancient software, yet understanding and restructuring a thought, while powerful, addresses the mind in a moment of stillness. Our greatest challenges often come when we are in motion, caught in the flow of daily habit and automatic reaction. This is where the final, most practical tool bridges the gap between insight and action. The most difficult challenges arrive not with a warning, but with a sudden, disorienting impact. To face them well requires a kind of mental training, a preparation that feels almost counterintuitive. This is where we find our fourth shared tool, a practice that transforms fear of the future into a source of profound strength. The Stoics called it Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of difficulties. It was not an exercise in pessimism, but a deliberate form of psychological vaccination. Imagine a Roman statesman, perhaps Seneca, beginning his day. Before the demands of public life came rushing in, he would sit quietly and mentally walk through the potential hardships of the coming hours. He would visualize the frustrating meeting, the rude comment from a rival, the disappointment of a plan falling through. But here is the crucial part: he would not just imagine the event. He would mentally rehearse his own response. He would see himself encountering the setback, feeling the initial sting of irritation or disappointment, and then consciously choosing to apply his principles, to respond with reason rather than raw reaction. He was, in essence, running a simulation. By vividly anticipating the challenge, he was draining it of its power to shock and overwhelm him in the moment it actually occurred. The goal was to inoculate the mind against the chaos of the unexpected. As Seneca wrote, "What is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness adds to the weight of a disaster." Premeditatio Malorum was the practice of removing that element of surprise, so that if hardship did arrive, it found a mind already braced, already prepared, and therefore already resilient. This ancient mental rehearsal finds its direct parallel in a modern therapeutic technique known as stress inoculation training. Developed by psychologist Donald Meichenbaum, this approach is built on the same foundational principle, that you can prepare the mind to handle stress by exposing it, in a controlled and gradual way, to the very things it fears. In a therapy setting, a client struggling with social anxiety might not be thrown immediately into a crowded party. Instead, they begin with imagination. They close their eyes and are guided through a detailed scenario, perhaps walking into a room full of people. They are asked to notice their rising anxiety, their automatic thoughts of being judged, and then to practice applying a coping statement, a pre-planned rational response like, "I am here to connect, not to perform." Most people are focused on themselves. They mentally rehearse staying calm, making eye contact, and breathing through the discomfort. This is coping rehearsal, a cognitive and emotional dry run. Just as the Stoic visualized maintaining virtue in the face of insult, the client visualizes maintaining composure in the face of anxiety. Both practices work by leveraging the brain's remarkable inability to perfectly distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. When you mentally rehearse a response, you are forging new neural pathways. You are teaching your brain, this is the sequence. See the trigger, feel the initial reaction, then activate the chosen coping strategy. You are building a mental muscle memory for resilience. The similarity is breathtaking in its precision. Consider a modern professional fearful of a critical performance review. A CBT therapist might guide them through a coping rehearsal, imagining the boss's stern face, hearing the critical feedback, feeling the flush of shame, and then practicing a self-compassionate internal response, focusing on the feedback as data for improvement rather than a verdict on their worth. 2,000 years earlier, a Stoic student might have visualized losing their position or social standing, feeling the pull of panic, and then consciously recalling the teaching that their true worth lies in their character, not in external titles. The structure is identical. Anticipate the challenge, feel the emotional wave, and execute the trained, rational counter-move. This shared practice reveals a deep truth about human anxiety. It thrives on uncertainty and the unknown. Both Stoicism and cognitive behavioral therapy understand that to defeat a monster, you must first bring it out of the shadows and into the light. By willingly confronting a feared scenario in the safe theater of your own mind, you dismantle its terrifying mystique. You prove to yourself in advance that you can survive it and even navigate it with wisdom. the event may still be difficult, but it is no longer a catastrophic, world-ending unknown. It becomes a manageable situation for which you have a plan. This transforms anxiety from a paralyzing force into a signal, a call to engage your prepared skills. The goal is not to become emotionless, but to prevent emotion from hijacking your capacity for reasoned action. It is the difference between being capsized by a wave and learning to ride it. Yet, for all the power of these four cognitive tools, a question lingers. If the parallels are so clear, so structurally identical, why did it take modern psychology so long to formally rediscover them? The answer lies not in the ideas themselves, but in the journey they took through history, and in the final, crucial ingredient that makes them work, an ingredient that both ancient and modern wisdom insist upon above all else. The final tool is perhaps the most liberating, and it begins with a simple act of sorting. Ancient Stoicism revolved around a single, powerful distinction, the dichotomy of control. Epictetus famously opened his manual for life with this very idea. He said, "Some things are within our power while others are not. Within our power are our opinions, our impulses, our desires, and our aversions. Everything else, our bodies, our possessions, our reputations, our political offices, are not." The entire Stoic art of living well, they argued, depends on meticulously sorting every event, every worry into one of these two baskets. If something is within your control, direct your energy and attention there fully. If it is not, then your only rational task is to accept it with grace, to release your demand that it be different. This was not a call to passivity, but to strategic focus. It was about investing your finite life force only where it could actually make a difference, in your own judgments and actions, and letting go of the exhausting, futile struggle to command the uncontrollable world. This philosophical sorting mechanism finds its precise, clinical counterpart in a core module of modern cognitive behavioral therapy, problem-solving therapy. When a client brings an overwhelming problem to a session, the therapist does not start by brainstorming solutions. They start by helping the client analyze the problem itself. The first critical question is, what parts of this situation can I actually change, and what parts must I find a way to accept? This is the modern dichotomy of control. The therapist might draw two circles on a piece of paper. In one circle, labeled "can change," go the elements that are within the client's direct influence, their own behavior, their communication, their preparation, their daily habits. In the other circle, labeled "cannot change," go the elements that are not, another person's feelings or choices, past events, certain aspects of a health condition, the weather, the stock market, the traffic. This act of sorting is itself therapeutic. It cuts through the tangled knot of anxiety, which often arises from desperately trying to control the uncontrollable while neglecting the power we do have. Once the sorting is done, the strategy becomes beautifully clear and twofold. For what is in the "can change" circle, you apply action-oriented skills. This is where you brainstorm concrete steps, set small, manageable goals, and build a plan. If you are anxious about a work project, and you have sorted that your boss's final opinion is not fully within your control, but your preparation is, then you focus your energy there. You break the project into tasks, you research, you practice. You channel your worry into constructive action over the things you can influence. For what is in the "cannot change" circle, you apply acceptance-based skills. This does not mean liking the situation or agreeing with it. It means ceasing to fight reality, which is a battle you are guaranteed to lose. Here, the tools might include mindfulness, to observe the difficult feeling without being consumed by it, or cognitive restructuring, to challenge the belief that this uncontrollable thing must not be happening. It might involve self-compassion or finding meaning in the hardship. The goal is to make peace with the unchangeable facts, so they no longer drain your energy and poison your present moment. Consider a universal human challenge, grief after a profound loss. The Stoic, applying the dichotomy, would acknowledge that the past event itself, the loss, is now entirely outside their control. To rail against it, to scream, "Why did this happen?" is to suffer twice, first from the loss itself, and then from our refusal to accept the reality of it. Their focus would turn to what is within their control, how they choose to remember the person, how they honor that memory through their own actions, how they manage their judgments about the pain. A modern therapist would guide a grieving client through an almost identical process. They would help them distinguish between the unchangeable reality of the loss and the changeable elements of their ongoing life, their self-care, their connection to others, the stories they tell themselves about the future. They would encourage action where possible, like establishing a new routine or reaching out for support, and cultivate radical acceptance for the permanent shape of the loss itself. This shared framework is the ultimate antidote to helplessness. It takes a sprawling, terrifying problem and gives you a map. It tells you where to stand and fight with all your skill, and where to stand down and make peace. It replaces the chaos of "everything is wrong" with the clarity of "this part I can work on, and this part I must learn to carry." It is the wisdom that turns a storm into a navigable sea, with one set of skills for sailing and another for weathering what cannot be sailed around. Stoic wisdom was never meant to be confined to the quiet of the study. It demanded movement. The philosophers taught that to live according to nature was not to contemplate virtue from a distance, but to enact it through right action in the world. Marcus Aurelius did not just write his meditations in a secluded palace. He led armies and governed an empire, using his principles to guide his decisions under immense pressure. Stoicism was a philosophy of doing. It understood that our character is not revealed in our private thoughts alone, but is forged and displayed through our consistent actions. This insistence on engaged, principled behavior forms a direct bridge to the second half of cognitive behavioral therapy's name, the B, which stands for behavior. And here we find one of the most practical and powerful tools for lifting the weight of depression, a technique called behavioral activation. The core insight shared by both systems is deceptively simple, yet it runs counter to our every instinct when we feel low. Our mood does not just drive our actions can also drive our mood. When we are depressed or deeply anxious, our natural impulse is to retreat. We cancel plans, we avoid tasks, we withdraw from activities that once brought us a sense of meaning or pleasure. We wait to feel better before we act. But this creates a vicious, self-reinforcing cycle. Inactivity leads to a sense of emptiness and failure, which deepens the low mood, which then justifies further withdrawal. The room grows darker, and we feel less and less capable of turning on the light. Both Stoic practice and modern therapy interrupt this cycle with the same prescription: act according to your values, not your fleeting feelings. A Stoic would say, your duty is to act virtuously, to contribute to your community, to fulfill your roles as a friend, a family member, a citizen, regardless of whether you feel inspired or happy in the moment. The action itself is the point. It is an expression of your character and your connection to the larger whole. Behavioral activation operates on the same mechanical truth. It is a structured process where, often with the help of a therapist, an individual identifies activities they have abandoned that are aligned with their values or that once provided a sense of accomplishment or joy. Then they schedule these activities and commit to doing them step by tiny step, especially when they do not feel like it. The goal is not to achieve monumental success or instant happiness. The goal is to break the inertia, to prove to yourself through direct experience that you are still capable of engagement, and to create opportunities for small moments of mastery or connection that your mood had been systematically blocking. Think of it like jump starting a car with a dead battery. You do not wait for the battery to magically recharge itself. you connect it to another source of energy and turn the key. The action of starting the engine is what begins the recharge process. So, a person who values being a good parent but has withdrawn might schedule a 15-minute board game with their child. Someone who once found purpose in creativity might commit to simply organizing their art supplies for 10 minutes. The action is small, manageable, and deliberately disconnected from the demand for a specific emotional outcome. You are not doing it to feel happy, you are doing it because it is a valued action, and yet something almost paradoxical happens. By moving your body and engaging your mind in a meaningful task, you often find that a shift in feeling follows. You might not feel elation, but you might feel a slight lessening of the heavy numbness, a faint sense of "I did that." This small success creates a tiny bit of evidence against the depressive thought that says, "I can't do anything." It is a practical, behavioral form of cognitive restructuring. You are gathering proof through action that your mood's assessment of your capabilities is flawed. The Stoics would recognize this immediately. Their entire philosophy was built on the premise that we cultivate courage by acting courageously, that we build justice by performing just acts, even when we are afraid or feel it is pointless. They knew that virtue is a habit strengthened through repetition. By choosing the right action, especially when it is difficult, we are not just affecting the world outside, we are actively sculpting our own inner landscape. We are wiring our brains to associate effort with purpose rather than with futility. This is why both frameworks are so powerful together. They address the human experience in the round. The cognitive tools help us untangle the distorted stories that paralyze us, and the behavioral tools provide the momentum to step out of the story and into a new chapter. One changes the narrative, the other changes the script, and in that space between thought and action, we find our freedom to rebuild a life of engagement, piece by deliberate piece. This silent moment of approval is where our entire emotional world is born. Within the Stoic model of the mind, every experience begins as a simple impression, a raw piece of data from the senses. You see a friend's frown across the room, you hear a critical tone in your partner's voice. The impression itself is neutral, just information, but then, in a flash, the mind does something. It rushes to interpret, it attaches a story, a meaning to that raw data. The frown means they are angry with you. The tone means you have done something wrong. This critical, instantaneous step is what the Stoics called giving your assent. It is the internal nod, the silent yes, this means what I think it means. Assent is the bridge between a neutral event and a loaded judgment. It is the point where you buy into the story your mind is telling, and once you buy in, the emotional consequences follow as surely as night follows day. Your assent to the thought, "they are angry with me," directly produces the feelings of anxiety, hurt, or defensiveness. The power and the danger lies in how automatic this process is. For most of human history, this moment of assent happened in the shadows, unseen and unchallenged. It felt less like a choice and more like a reflex, as inevitable as flinching from a sudden loud noise. The revolutionary aim of Stoic training was to shine a light into that shadow. The goal was to learn to pause at the threshold of assent, to intercept that automatic nod, and to ask a simple, profound question before granting it: is this story actually true? This is the precise psychological terrain that modern cognitive behavioral therapy maps with such clinical clarity. When a therapist teaches a client the skill of catching an automatic negative thought, they are providing the tools to identify that exact moment of Stoic assent. The therapeutic term automatic thought is the modern name for the impression that has already been dressed in a judgmental story, the thought that appears with the emotional charge already attached. The act of catching it is the practice of noticing you have just given your assent. It is the realization, I just bought that idea. I just agreed that this situation is catastrophic or that I am worthless. Think of it like this. Your mind is a factory that produces thoughts constantly. Most of them are harmless background noise, but some are these urgent, persuasive sales pitches for a certain emotional state. This is a disaster, it says. You are not good enough, it insists. For most of our lives, we are the customer who automatically buys every product this salesman pushes across the counter. We accept the thought, we assent to it, and we pay for it with our peace of mind. Learning to catch the thought is the moment you become a skeptical shopper. It is when you take the product, hold it up to the light, and say, "Wait, let me examine this before I pay." You are not trying to stop the salesman from making his pitch. That is impossible. The mind will always generate impressions. You are training yourself to interrupt the automatic purchase. The therapeutic technique builds a speed bump in that previously frictionless process. In practice, this might look like someone feeling a sudden surge of social anxiety at a party. The old, automatic sequence was impression, a room full of people laughing, immediate assent to the thought, "They are laughing at me," followed by the full emotional cascade of shame and the behavioral urge to leave. The new, trained sequence introduces a pause, impression, a room full of people laughing. The initial thought, "They are laughing at me," still arises. That is the salesman's pitch. But now the individual has practiced catching it. They notice the thought. They might even silently label it, "Ah, that's mind reading," or "That's personalization." This moment of noticing is the withholding of immediate assent. It creates a tiny gap, a space of mere milliseconds, but in that space, freedom is found. In that space, they can then choose a different response. They might look for evidence. Are people actually looking at me? They might offer an alternative interpretation. They are probably sharing a joyful story. They might simply note the thought and let it pass without buying it. The emotional cascade is diminished or even averted. This is not about positive thinking. It is about accurate thinking. The Stoics were not asking you to replace "this is terrible" with "this is wonderful." They were asking you to replace "this is terrible" with "this is what has happened." Now, what is the most virtuous, rational response available to me? CBT is not asking you to replace "I am a failure" with "I am perfect." It is asking you to replace it with a more balanced assessment. I failed at this specific task, which is disappointing, but it does not define my entire worth. I can learn from it. Both systems are training you to become the editor of your mind's first draft, to question the headlines before they go to print and shape your day. The ultimate goal is to move from being a passive recipient of your thoughts to an active observer and curator. It is the difference between living in a house where the lights turn on and off at random, causing confusion and fear, and learning where the light switches are. The impressions, the automatic thoughts, will always flicker, but your assent is the switch, and you can learn with practice to choose which ones to turn on and which to leave in the dark. The power to reshape a story is the power to change a life. This brings us to a transformative tool shared by both the therapist and the philosopher, the art of looking at the same facts through a different lens. In cognitive behavioral therapy, this is called cognitive reframing, and it is a deliberate skill. It is not about denying reality or slapping a happy face on a difficult situation. It is about recognizing that any event can be viewed from multiple angles and consciously choosing the perspective that is most helpful for moving forward. A client stuck in a frustrating job might initially frame their situation as, "I am trapped in a dead-end role with a terrible manager." This frame feels absolute and leads to feelings of helplessness and resentment. The therapist's role is to gently guide them to explore other valid frames. Could it also be framed as, "This challenging environment is teaching me exactly what I do not want in my next role, and it is strengthening my patience and professional boundaries." The facts, the job, and the manager have not changed. but the meaning assigned to those facts, and therefore the emotional and behavioral response, can shift entirely. The new frame is not necessarily more true, but it is more adaptive. It opens a path for agency and learning where before there was only a brick wall. This therapeutic move finds its ancient echo in the worn pages of a Roman emperor's personal journal. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire plagued by war, plague, and court intrigue, constantly practiced this very skill. He called it the discipline of perception or the art of redescription. He did not wait for a therapist to suggest new frames. He drilled himself in generating them on demand. His writings are a masterclass in cognitive reframing. When faced with an obstructive person, he did not just see an enemy. He trained himself to see a training partner for his own virtues of patience, tolerance, and justice. He would write, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." An obstacle was mentally redescribed as the very path forward. When insulted, he practiced reframing the insult not as a wound to his ego, but as a reflection of the insulter's own confusion or poor character. He asked himself, why should it trouble you that someone thinks poorly of you if you yourself know you are not as they describe? In one powerful passage, he instructs himself to see a piece of spoiled food not with disgust, but with calm recognition. This is a fish, this is wine, noting their natural state without layering on a judgment of this is terrible. He was systematically stripping away the value-laden story to see the plain facts, and then choosing a story that served his peace of mind and his duty. The parallel is exact. Both the modern client and the ancient emperor are engaging in a conscious, willful act of reinterpretation. They are taking the raw material of their experience and deciding how to assemble it. The CBT client learns to ask, what is another way of seeing this? Marcus Aurelius practiced answering that question before it was even asked. This practice reveals a profound truth about human psychology. We are not just meaning-making creatures, we are meaning-choosing creatures. Our initial interpretation is often a default setting, a product of habit, mood, or cultural conditioning, but it is rarely the only possible setting. The Stoic redescription and the therapeutic reframe are both methods for accessing that menu of alternative settings. Consider a common modern stressor, a demanding project with a tight deadline. The automatic frame might be, this is overwhelming and unfair, I cannot handle it. This frame triggers anxiety and avoidance. A Stoic-inspired reframe, practiced in the style of Marcus Aurelius, might be, this demand is an opportunity to cultivate focus, discipline, and resilience. It is a chance to prove my capability under pressure. A CBT-informed reframe might be, this is a challenge that will require me to prioritize and use my skills efficiently. I have handled difficult tasks before. Notice the subtle difference. The Stoic frame leans into virtue and character development, while the therapeutic frame leans into evidence and practical competence. Yet the underlying mechanism is identical. Both replace a disempowering narrative with an empowering one that is equally grounded in reality. The goal is not to pretend the project is easy or fun, but to connect it to a larger sense of purpose or proven ability. This mental flexibility is a superpower in a world of constant uncertainty. It transforms victims of circumstance into architects of response. A sudden rainstorm on a day you planned a picnic is no longer a ruined day. It can be reframed as a chance for a cozy afternoon indoors or a refreshing walk with an umbrella. A critical comment is no longer just an attack. It can be a data point for self-improvement or simply noise to be disregarded. The event itself holds no inherent emotional label. We apply the label, and if we applied it once, we can learn to take it off and apply a different one. This is the heart of resilience. It is not an armor that prevents the arrow from hitting, but the skill to pull the arrow out and decide what the wound will mean for the journey ahead. By mastering the art of redescription, we reclaim authorship of our inner world. we learn that while we cannot always control the plot twists life delivers, we hold absolute editorial control over the voice of the narrator. The most dangerous stories are the ones we stop questioning because they feel like bedrock truth. This is where the work of both therapist and philosopher moves from the surface of daily thoughts to the deep foundations of the self. In cognitive behavioral therapy, there exists a remarkably simple yet profound tool for this excavation, known as the downward arrow technique. It begins with a surface-level automatic thought. A client might say, "I feel anxious because I made a mistake in my presentation." The therapist does not stop there. They gently ask, "And if that is true, what does that mistake mean about you?" The client might respond, "It means I'm not competent enough." The therapist continues, "And if it's true that you're not competent enough, what does that mean?" The client, following the logical thread, might say, "It means I'll never be successful." The therapist asks once more, "And if you'll never be successful, what does that ultimately mean about you?" After a pause, the client might arrive at a quiet, painful conclusion. "It means I'm inadequate, I'm not enough." This line of questioning is the downward arrow, a methodical descent through the layers of judgment to hit the solid, often painful core belief. These core beliefs are not about situations, they are global, absolute statements about the self, the world, or the future. I am unlovable. I am helpless. The world is a dangerous place. People cannot be trusted. They are the silent, unchallenged axioms from which all of our automatic negative thoughts are derived. They are the faulty operating system running in the background, generating error messages all day long. The downward arrow technique provides the structured path to finally locate that source code. It turns a moment of anxiety into a doorway leading straight to the central chamber where our deepest fears about ourselves reside. This clinical process is the direct, methodical counterpart to the Stoic quest to identify and uproot false dogmas. The Stoics understood that our suffering was not random, but sprang from deep-seated, often unconscious, philosophical premises about what is good, bad, necessary, or fearful. A student plagued by anxiety over public speaking was not just nervous about a performance. The Stoic teacher would guide him to see that his distress was rooted in a deeper dogma, perhaps the belief that his worth is dependent on the approval of others, or that disgrace is the greatest evil. Epictetus spent his life challenging these fundamental assumptions. He would say, "It is not things that disturb people, but their judgments about things." But he knew those judgments came from somewhere, from a foundational set of beliefs that had been accepted without scrutiny. The Stoic practice of dialogue, of relentless self-examination, was their downward arrow. They asked, "Why are you disturbed? What do you believe to be at stake here? Is that belief consistent with nature and reason?" They sought to trace the emotional reaction back to its source, to expose the rotten premise so it could be replaced with a sound one. The parallel is a masterstroke of psychological insight across time. Both systems recognize that we cannot find lasting peace by merely pruning the weeds, by challenging only the surface thoughts. We must find the root. The modern client discovers a core belief of "I am unlovable," which generates a lifetime of interpreting neutral social cues as rejection. The ancient Stoics sought to identify the dogma that external validation is required for happiness, which generates a lifetime of slavery to others' opinions. The target is the same, a fundamental governing rule of the inner world that is false, limiting, and generative of pain. The downward arrow and the Socratic dialogue are simply two languages for the same investigative mission, to follow the trail of distress back to its origin point in a flawed idea about the self. Uncovering this core belief is often a moment of both discomfort and profound clarity. There is a shock of recognition, a feeling of, "Oh, that is the tape that has been playing my whole life." But this discovery is not an endpoint, it is the true beginning of liberation. because once the core belief is visible, held in the light of conscious awareness, it can finally be questioned. It transforms from an invisible law of your universe into a hypothesis, a claim that can be tested. The work then shifts from managing symptoms to rewriting the foundational narrative. This sets the stage for the most courageous phase of the journey, where insight must be forged into a new way of being, through the consistent, daily practice of building a life that proves the old story wrong. The foundational beliefs we uncover are not the final destination. They are a starting point for a much larger shift in perspective, one that requires us to step outside of ourselves. Here we find a fascinating point of divergence, and then a profound point of convergence between the ancient and modern systems. Stoicism was not merely a set of psychological tools. It was a complete philosophy of life, grounded in a specific view of the cosmos. The Stoics believed in the logos, a rational, intelligent principle that wove through the entire universe, connecting all things in a single, living, purposeful whole. From this cosmic perspective, every individual life, every event, was a thread in a vast, beautiful tapestry. This belief provided the ultimate context for human struggles. To view one's own troubles sub specie eternitatis under the aspect of eternity was to see them against the backdrop of infinite time and space. A personal setback, a moment of humiliation, even a profound loss, would be seen not as a world-ending catastrophe, but as a small, transient part of a grand, unfolding pattern. This was the ultimate reframe, a philosophical lens that could shrink even the most daunting personal problems down to a manageable, even meaningful size. It invited a sense of humility and connection, asking the individual to see themselves as a citizen of the cosmos, whose personal drama was but one scene in an eternal play. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, as a clinical science, makes no such metaphysical claims. It does not ask clients to believe in a rational universe or a divine plan. Its foundation is empirical, focused on observable patterns of thought and behavior. Yet, within its toolkit exists a strikingly similar psychological maneuver designed to achieve a nearly identical state of mind. It is called decentering. Decentering is the learned ability to observe your own thoughts and feelings from a slight distance, as if you were watching clouds pass in the sky, rather than being the sky itself. It is the skill of recognizing that I am having the thought that I am a failure is a fundamentally different experience than blindly believing I am a failure. This shift creates psychological space. It allows you to see your problems not as the absolute center of the universe, but as events happening within a much larger field of your life and the world around you. A therapist might guide someone overwhelmed by anxiety to practice this by asking, if you were to look at this situation from the perspective of your best friend, what would they see? What about from the perspective of yourself 10 years from now? These questions are a gentle, secular form of viewing a problem sub specie eternitatis. They pull the camera back from the intense close-up, revealing a wider landscape. The goal is not to dismiss the problem as trivial, but to see it in its true proportion, to prevent it from consuming the entire frame of your existence. Consider a person crushed by the end of a romantic relationship. The Stoic, drawing on the view from eternity, might reflect on the impermanent nature of all things, on how love and loss are part of the universal cycle, and how this pain, however sharp, is a shared human experience that will, in time, find its place in the story of their life. The person practicing decentering in therapy might learn to say, I am noticing a feeling of devastating sadness. I am having the thought that I will never love again. By naming the feeling and the thought as objects of awareness, they create a separation. They are no longer just the sadness, they are the one who is experiencing it. This creates room to then ask, what else is true in my life right now, even alongside this pain? Perhaps there is still friendship, work that matters, or personal strengths that remain. Both approaches, one philosophical and one clinical, achieve the same crucial psychological relief. They break the spell of egocentricity that suffering casts. Pain convinces us that we are alone at the center of a tragedy. Decentering and the view from eternity both reply, you are part of something larger. Your thoughts are not the totality of reality, they are events within it. This shared insight is perhaps the most graceful answer to the problem of core beliefs. You do not always have to violently uproot a deep-seated fear. Sometimes you can simply learn to see it from so far away that it loses its power to define your entire horizon. It becomes a feature of the landscape, not the landscape itself. And in that spacious awareness, a new kind of freedom is born, not from changing the content of your mind, but from changing your relationship to all of its contents. This deep shift in perspective points directly to the most stubborn source of our distress. In the middle of the 20th century, a psychologist named Albert Ellis grew frustrated with the slow pace of traditional psychoanalysis. He believed that if you could change a person's beliefs, you could change their emotional life with dramatic speed. His creation, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, or REBT, became a roaring, confrontational fire that would help forge the more measured approach of cognitive behavioral therapy. Ellis proposed a beautifully simple and devastatingly effective formula for human suffering. He called it the ABC model. A is the activating event, something that happens. C is the emotional and behavioral consequence, how you feel and act. But between A and C, Ellis insisted, was the true culprit B, your beliefs about the event. And among all beliefs, he identified a specific category as the most toxic, what he called irrational musts. These are the absolute, rigid demands we place on ourselves, on others, and on the world. I must succeed, people must treat me fairly, the world must be easy and comfortable. Ellis saw that when we hold these beliefs, we are setting ourselves up for a psychological crash. Because the world is under no obligation to follow our demands, when reality inevitably contradicts our must, we don't just feel disappointment, we feel catastrophic anxiety, towering rage, or profound depression. The emotional consequence, the C, is not caused by the event, but by our rigid insistence that the event should not have happened. The core of REBT therapy was a forceful, logical skill he called disputation. The therapist would help the client actively argue against their own musts. They would ask, where is the evidence that you must be perfect? Is it truly awful, 100% terrible, that this person acted rudely? Can you absolutely prove the world should be fair? The goal was to replace the rigid must with a flexible preference, to shift from, I must be loved by everyone, to, I would prefer to be liked, but I can accept that I won't be. This single move from a demand to a preference is psychologically liberating. It transforms a guaranteed recipe for misery into a manageable condition of life. Now listen to the voice of the Stoics echoing across 2 millennia. The central tenet of their practice was to live in accordance with nature. This did not mean retreating to the woods. It meant aligning your will, your desires and aversions with the actual, unfolding course of events. The fundamental cause of suffering, they taught, was not events themselves, but our rebellion against them, our demand that reality conform to our personal preferences. Epictetus put it with stunning clarity. He said, do not seek to have events happen as you want them to, but instead want them to happen as they do happen, and your life will go well. This is the philosophical bedrock of Ellis's disputation technique. The Stoic want things to happen as they do is the ultimate dissolution of the irrational must. It is the conscious, willful replacement of a demand with acceptance. When you stop demanding that a traffic jam should not exist and instead accept that, in this moment, it does exist, your frustration loses its fuel. The event is the same, your relationship to it is transformed. Ellis was providing the clinical manual for a psychological move the Stoics had described as a spiritual one. The irrational belief, my partner must never let me down, is a demand that the complex, flawed nature of human beings be different. The Stoic would see this as a refusal to accept the nature of people and relationships, which inherently include misunderstanding and occasional failure. To dispute that must is to begin aligning your expectations with reality, which is the very essence of following nature's course. This connection reveals why these ideas are so enduringly powerful. They attack suffering at its root, in our sense of entitlement about how life ought to be. A person stuck in anger after a professional rejection is often clinging to the demand, "This should not have happened to me, I deserved that position." The REBT therapist disputes the should. The Stoic teacher would point out that the nature of competitive endeavors includes both victory and loss. Both guides are leading the individual to the same quiet shore, the shore where you stop arguing with the waves and learn to swim with the current. The emotional relief that follows is not passivity. It is the profound peace that comes when you stop wasting your vital energy on a battle you cannot win, the battle against what is already true. This frees that energy for the only battle that matters, the one within your own mind, to choose your response with wisdom and courage. Peace arrives when you stop fighting the waves and simply notice the water. This final skill returns us to the most immediate experience of all, the present moment. While mindfulness is often linked to Eastern meditation, its core practice of focused, non-judgmental attention was a vital Stoic discipline. Marcus Aurelius constantly pulled his own mind back from anxious forecasts about the future or painful replays of the past. He would write reminders to himself, simple commands to attend to the work in front of him, to see the essence of the thing before him without the layer of story. He advised himself to confine his attention to the present moment, to the task his own two hands were doing. This was not an escape from responsibility, but a deep immersion into it. By anchoring his awareness in the now, he prevented his mental energy from being scattered into regrets about what had been or fears about what might be. The Stoic present moment was not a passive state of bliss. It was the active ground of virtuous action, the only place where reason could actually be applied. This ancient practice of present moment attention finds a precise and powerful application in a modern therapeutic evolution known as third-wave cognitive behavioral therapy. One of its most successful forms is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or MBCT, developed specifically to help people who have recovered from depression prevent a relapse. MBCT integrates traditional cognitive techniques with structured mindfulness training. The clinical insight is profound. For someone prone to depression, a passing low mood can act as a trigger, activating a cascade of old, automatic negative thoughts about the self and the future. This cascade can pull a person back into the full depressive episode. MBCT teaches a different response. Instead of getting caught in the content of those thoughts, "I'm failing again," or "nothing will ever get better," individuals learn to step back and observe the thoughts and the low mood itself with gentle detachment. They practice seeing a sad feeling not as a permanent truth, but as a temporary mental event, a passing weather pattern in the mind. This present moment awareness creates a critical gap. It allows a person to notice the early warning signs of a depressive spiral and to respond with self-care or a change in activity, rather than being pulled unconsciously into the old, familiar story. The parallel here is a beautiful fusion of ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience. Marcus Aurelius practicing present moment focus to maintain his equanimity amid the chaos of ruling an empire is engaging in the same fundamental mental training as a modern client in an MBCT program learning to sit with a feeling of sadness without being consumed by it. Both are cultivating the observer within. The Stoics sought to observe impressions without rash assent, to see events clearly. The mindfulness student learns to observe thoughts and feelings without immediate identification, to see mental processes clearly. The goal is identical: to gain freedom from the automatic, habitual patterns that dictate our suffering. It is the ultimate application of the dichotomy of control, bringing your full attention and care to what is happening right now, which is the only thing ever truly within your sphere of influence, while letting go of your struggle with the unchangeable past or the uncertain future. Consider a simple, everyday example. You are working on a project and make a small error. The old pattern might be an automatic thought, "I ruined it," followed by a flood of anxiety about future consequences, which spirals into a story of your own incompetence. The Stoic, trained in present moment focus, would catch the initial judgment, see the error simply as a fact, and immediately turn their attention back to the next right action, the correction. The person trained in mindfulness would notice the rising anxiety, label it, there's anxiety, feel its physical sensation without fighting it, and then gently guide their attention back to the task. Both approaches bypass the catastrophic narrative by anchoring awareness in the immediate reality of the present. This is not about suppressing emotion, but about changing your relationship to it, meeting it with awareness rather than fear. When you can sit with discomfort without being swept away, you discover it is not a permanent state, but a changing one. And in that discovery lies the power to choose a different path, moment by mindful moment. The ultimate aim of Stoicism was never merely to feel better. It was to live well, to flourish as a human being through the cultivation of virtue. For the Stoic, the four cardinal virtues were the compass points for a meaningful life: wisdom to see the world clearly, courage to act rightly in the face of fear, justice to treat others with fairness, and temperance to master one's own desires and impulses. Emotional tranquility was not the goal in itself, but a natural byproduct of this virtuous alignment. A life lived with reason and character would, by its very nature, be a life of profound inner peace. The metric of success was not the absence of painful feelings, but the presence of right action. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations, he was not seeking to cure his anxiety. He was reminding himself of his duty, his role, his commitment to justice and self-discipline. His personal struggles with grief or weariness were framed within this larger quest to be a good man. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy, as a clinical practice, operates with a different, more immediate metric. Its primary goal is typically symptom reduction, to alleviate the suffering of anxiety, to lift the weight of depression, to help a client function better in their daily life. A therapist measures progress by decreased distress, improved mood, and more adaptive behaviors. The question is not, are you living a more virtuous life? But rather, are you feeling less overwhelmed? Are you engaging in activities you value? This difference in foundational goals might seem to create a vast philosophical canyon between the two systems. One aims for moral excellence, the other for psychological relief. But when you look at the actual process, at what a person does in therapy and in philosophical practice, the canyon begins to close. While CBT does not prescribe the four Stoic virtues by name, the very work of therapy becomes a functional, lived pursuit of their essence. Consider wisdom. In Stoicism, wisdom is the ability to see the world as it truly is, to distinguish what is within our control from what is not, to perceive events without the distortion of passion or prejudice. In the therapy room, wisdom is cultivated through cognitive restructuring and Socratic questioning. When a client learns to catch a cognitive distortion, to dispute an irrational must, and to see their situation with greater balance and evidence, what are they doing if not training in clear-sighted perception? They are learning to see reality more accurately, which is the practical heart of wisdom, or take courage. Stoic courage is the strength to endure hardship and to act rightly even when it is terrifying or difficult. In CBT, a client with social anxiety who uses stress inoculation to mentally rehearse entering a crowded room and then follows through with a behavioral activation plan to actually attend a gathering is exercising profound courage. They are acting in accordance with their values connection, growth despite the intense fear. The therapeutic framework calls it exposure or behavioral activation, but the inner experience is one of bravery, of moving toward what is important even when every instinct screams to retreat. Justice in the Stoic sense involves our duty to others, to our community. While modern therapy is individually focused, the process of aligning one's actions with long-term well-being almost always expands outward. As a person heals their depression and engages in valued actions, they become more present for their family, more reliable at work, more capable of contributing to their community. They are repairing their capacity for social connection, which is a form of justice to the people in their lives. Temperance or self-discipline is the mastery of impulses. This is the very engine of behavioral change in CBT. When a person resists the urge to retreat into isolation, when they choose to complete a thought record instead of ruminating, when they practice a mindfulness exercise instead of reacting in anger, they are strengthening the muscle of self-regulation. They are practicing temperance in the most concrete way possible by making conscious choices that serve their long-term health over their short-term discomfort. So the journey through therapy, while framed as healing, becomes an inadvertent apprenticeship in virtue. The client may start by wanting to feel less sad, but to achieve that, they must learn to see more clearly, act more bravely, connect more honestly, and regulate their impulses more skillfully. They may not use the ancient language, but they are walking the same path. The Stoic sought virtue to find tranquility. The therapy client seeks tranquility and, in the process, must build the components of a virtuous character to attain it. This reveals a beautiful symmetry. Perhaps mental health, in its fullest sense, is not just the absence of illness, but the presence of a certain kind of strength, a resilient and flexible character capable of meeting reality with clear eyes and a steady heart. It suggests that the ancient goal and the modern goal, though starting from different places, converge in the same kind of person, someone who is not a slave to their emotions, but an author of their actions. Yet this deep convergence raises a vital question. If the tools are so similar, why does modern therapy not simply teach Stoicism? The answer lies in a decisive and deliberate separation. Cognitive behavioral therapy did not become a world-changing force by embracing ancient philosophy. It became one by leaving it behind. This was not a rejection of the wisdom, but a strategic divorce. The founders of CBT, like Beck and Albert Ellis, performed a radical act of extraction. They took the potent psychological mechanisms they observed, the link between thought and emotion, the patterns of distorted reasoning, the power of behavioral rehearsal, and carefully peeled them away from the Stoic worldview that housed them. They set aside the talk of cosmic logos, the pursuit of virtue as a cosmic duty, and the metaphysical framework of living in accordance with nature. Why? To subject the bare mechanics to the unforgiving light of science. This was the birth of the evidence-based framework. A Stoic teacher could persuade you with eloquent reason and personal example. A CBT therapist needed to prove, through repeatable experiment and measurable outcome, that challenging an automatic thought actually reduced symptoms of depression. This required turning insights into testable hypotheses and techniques into manualized protocols. A protocol is a step-by-step guide, a consistent recipe that can be taught to any therapist and delivered to any client in a standardized way. This was the key that unlocked the vault of mainstream clinical science. A university psychology department or a hospital board could not adopt a 2,000-year-old philosophy as a treatment. But they could adopt a manualized, researched protocol with clear data showing its effectiveness for specific conditions. This empirical rigor gave CBT its credibility and its reach. It moved the work from the realm of personal wisdom, accessible only to those who studied philosophy, into the realm of public health, available to anyone struggling with anxiety or depression. This is the critical distinction. Stoicism offers a comprehensive way of life, a deep answer to the question of how to live. CBT offers a targeted set of skills to answer the question of how to stop suffering. One is a philosophy that includes therapeutic techniques. The other is a therapy that was built upon philosophical insights. This separation allowed researchers to ask precise questions. Does keeping a thought record lower anxiety scores more than traditional talk therapy? Does behavioral activation improve daily functioning in individuals with major depression? The answers, compiled from thousands of studies, created an overwhelming body of evidence that these methods work. That evidence, not the authority of ancient texts, is what fills therapists' offices and insurance reimbursement codes today. So we arrive at a fascinating paradox. The very act of stripping away the philosophy to isolate the mechanics is what allowed those ancient mechanics to be validated and disseminated on a scale the Stoics could never have imagined. The timeless tools were finally given a modern passport, stamped with clinical trials and peer review, allowing them to travel into the heart of our contemporary world of stress and overwhelm. This journey from the porch to the clinic, from dogma to data, reveals a profound truth about human knowledge. Sometimes, to make an ancient insight truly universal, you must first remove its original clothing and dress it in the uniform of the current age. The story of this rediscovery winds through the quiet corridors of mid-century intellectual life. Aaron Beck was a man of science, trained in medicine and psychoanalysis, not in classical philosophy. It is highly unlikely he was sitting in his Philadelphia office, poring over the leather-bound works of Epictetus or Marcus Aurelius. The connection was not direct, but it was unmistakably real, flowing through the cultural groundwater of his time. To understand how Stoic thought seeped into the foundation of his therapy, we must look to a colleague whose influence was both profound and openly philosophical. That colleague was Albert Ellis. Years before Beck began publishing his cognitive model, Ellis had already launched a therapeutic revolution with his rational emotive behavior therapy. And Ellis was remarkably explicit about his intellectual debts. He repeatedly, publicly credited the ancient Stoic philosophers as the primary inspiration for his entire approach. In his writings and lectures, Ellis would point directly to Epictetus's famous dictum, that men are disturbed not by things but by their views of them, and call it the cornerstone of his own ABC model. He saw the Stoics as the original cognitive therapists, masters of identifying and disputing the irrational beliefs that cause emotional suffering. Ellis did not just borrow an idea, he built a bridge. He translated the Stoic emphasis on reason and judgment into a forceful, confrontational style of therapy designed to attack what he called masturbation, those rigid demands we place on reality. This bridge, built by Ellis, became a major thoroughfare of psychological thought in the 1950s and 60s. Beck, working in the same ferment of new ideas, would have been intimately aware of Ellis's work. The professional community was small, debates were lively, and Ellis's provocative claims were impossible to ignore. While Beck's own style was more collaborative and empirical than Ellis's forceful disputation, the foundational premise he encountered through the filter of Ellis's interpretation was pure Stoicism. It was the idea that our emotional world is constructed by our evaluations. This pathway reveals something beautiful about how wisdom travels. Stoic philosophy never truly vanished. It persisted through the centuries, woven into Western literature, ethics, and even theology. By the 20th century, its core psychological insights had become part of the educated atmosphere, a set of tools for living that thoughtful people might encounter through essays, novels, or popular philosophy. When Ellis read Epictetus, he recognized a powerful, practical psychology waiting to be systematized. When Beck, in turn, engaged with the ideas Ellis had brought to the forefront, he was encountering a refined, modernized version of that same ancient insight. Beck then did what a brilliant scientist does. He observed the mechanism in action in his patients, stripped it of its philosophical terminology, and devised a way to measure and test it. So the lineage is clear but indirect, from the Stoic classroom to the pages of philosophers read by intellectuals like Ellis, to Ellis's bold therapeutic translation, and finally to Beck's clinical research and refinement. The ideas were rediscovered not in a library archive, but in the living laboratory of human distress, where they proved their worth once again. This was not a deliberate act of historical recovery, but a natural convergence where the timeless mechanics of the human mind finally met the modern tools of scientific validation. The true power of these ideas is revealed not in theory but in practice. Let us follow a single, common human fear through two different rooms separated by centuries. Imagine a person, we will call him Leo, who feels a deep dread about an upcoming public speech. His heart races at the thought, his mind conjures images of stumbling over words, of silent, judging faces, of a humiliation that feels utterly unbearable. This is the raw material of suffering. Now, watch how it is shaped by two different guides. First, Leo enters the simple, sunlit courtyard of Epictetus' school. The teacher notices his student's agitation. He does not begin with reassurance. He begins with a question. "Tell me, Leo," Epictetus might say, "what is it that troubles you about this speech?" Leo would likely speak of his fear of stumbling, of being laughed at, of appearing a fool. Epictetus would listen, then pose his foundational challenge. Is the speaking itself within your power or outside of it? He would guide Leo to see that the content of the speech, his preparation, his effort, these are within his control. The reactions of the audience, their laughter or silence, their opinions, these are not. Then why, Epictetus would continue, are you attaching your peace of mind to what is not your own? The work begins with this sorting, the dichotomy of control. The anxiety, Epictetus suggests, springs from a misplaced judgment. Leo has judged the audience's disapproval as an evil to be avoided at all costs, and his own performance as the sole measure of his worth. The teacher would then challenge this catastrophic narrative. What is the worst that could truly happen? Will you cease to be a person of character if one speech goes poorly? Is the opinion of strangers the court that decides your virtue? This is the Stoic dialectic in action, using relentless, logical questioning to expose the sophistry of Leo's fear. The preparation Epictetus advises is mental. He would instruct Leo in Premeditatio Malorum to vividly imagine the scenario he fears, the stammer, the cold room, and to see himself within it, maintaining his composure, accepting the outcome with equanimity. The goal is not a flawless performance, but a virtuous response to whatever happens. The framing is about character, about aligning one's will with nature, and finding freedom in focusing solely on what is his to do. Now let us step into a modern, softly lit therapy office. Leo describes the same paralyzing fear to his cognitive behavioral therapy practitioner. The therapist's first move is remarkably similar. They collaborate to map the sequence. Let's break down what happens when you think about the speech, the therapist might say. They would identify the activating event, the thought of public speaking. Then they would help Leo catch the automatic thoughts. My mind will go blank. Everyone will think him incompetent. It will be a complete disaster. These thoughts are written down, made objective. Next, the therapist introduces the language of cognitive distortions. Together, they might label these thoughts as catastrophizing and mind reading. The question of evidence comes next. What is the proof that your mind will absolutely go blank? Has there been a time you spoke without that happening? What is the proof that everyone will judge you harshly? This Socratic questioning gently dismantles the absolute certainty of the fear. The preparation here is also mental, but it is called coping rehearsal or stress inoculation. The therapist might guide Leo through a detailed visualization of walking onto the stage, feeling the anxiety rise, and then practicing a coping statement. I am prepared, it's okay to be nervous, my goal is to share my message, not to be perfect. They might role-play the event, building tolerance to the anxiety in a safe space. The goal is symptom reduction and improved functioning, to help Leo deliver the speech without being disabled by his fear. The framing is about correcting faulty cognitions and building behavioral skills to manage emotional distress. The parallels are stunning. Both guides immediately steer Leo away from the event itself and toward his interpretation of it. Both identify the catastrophic all-or-nothing judgments. Both employ questioning to challenge the evidence for those judgments. Both use mental rehearsal as a form of preparation. The core mechanics are identical: intercept the automatic thought, examine it with reason, and rehearse a healthier response. The differences lie in the clothing of the ideas. The Stoic speaks of virtue, nature, and what is within our power. The therapist speaks of cognitive distortions, evidence, and coping mechanisms. One aims for a philosophical realignment of the self, the other for a psychological recalibration of thought patterns. Yet, in the quiet moment before Leo steps onto the stage, the result of either journey might look the same: a deep breath, a focus on the task at hand, and a mind no longer hijacked by its own terrifying stories. This is the timeless utility of the tool, no matter the language used to describe its handle. A philosophy of life and a clinical treatment are not the same thing, and the differences matter. While the tools are remarkably similar, the ultimate destinations of Stoicism and cognitive behavioral therapy are not identical. Understanding where the paths diverge helps us appreciate the unique value of each and prevents us from making a simplistic, one-to-one swap. The first and most profound divergence lies in their fundamental purpose. Stoicism was never designed as a therapy for mental illness. It is a comprehensive philosophy, a complete system for living well, aimed at achieving what the Greeks called eudaimonia, a deep and lasting state of human flourishing. This flourishing comes from living a life of virtue, of reason, of courage, justice, and self-discipline, in harmony with the nature of the cosmos. The reduction of emotional suffering is a welcome byproduct of this alignment, but it is not the primary goal. The goal is to become an excellent human being. Cognitive behavioral therapy, in stark contrast, was born in a clinic. Its primary purpose is the alleviation of specific psychological suffering, anxiety disorders, depression, phobias. It is a time-limited, goal-oriented treatment. A course of CBT might last 12 to 20 weeks, with clear objectives like reducing panic attacks or improving daily mood. Its framework is medical and psychological, not cosmological or ethical. It aims to restore functioning, not to answer the ultimate questions of how to live a meaningful life. This difference in scope is crucial. You can successfully complete CBT for social anxiety and still be left wondering about your purpose, your values, or your place in the world. Stoicism, on the other hand, attempts to provide answers to those very questions, but it does not offer a manualized protocol for treating major depressive disorder. One is a targeted repair job on a leaking roof. The other is a blueprint for building a whole house designed to weather any storm. The second major divergence appears in their relationship to emotion itself. The Stoic ideal was apatheia, a state of freedom from the destructive, irrational passions. This is often misunderstood as becoming emotionless or cold. For the Stoics, it meant achieving a state where your peace of mind could not be overthrown by external events, where you experience the world with clear judgment rather than being whipped around by storms of fear, rage, or overwhelming grief. The goal was to transform these turbulent passions into stable, rational dispositions. A Stoic sage would not feel a crashing wave of panic, but a calm recognition of danger followed by reasoned action. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy has no such ideal of eradicating passion. Its goal is not apatheia, but effective emotion regulation. CBT sees emotions like anxiety, sadness, and even anger as natural, healthy, and often adaptive parts of the human experience. Anxiety can signal real danger, sadness can accompany loss, anger can highlight injustice. The problem CBT addresses is not the existence of these emotions, but their becoming excessive, persistent, or disconnected from reality. The therapy aims not to eliminate healthy fear, but to prevent it from ballooning into a debilitating phobia. It seeks not to erase sadness, but to keep it from deepening into a paralyzing depression. The goal is management and balance, not transcendence. A person who completes CBT for anxiety will likely still feel nervous before a big meeting, but they will have the tools to prevent that nervousness from spiraling into a catastrophic narrative that ruins their week. They learn to ride the wave of the emotion, not to stop the ocean from having waves. This distinction protects against a potential misapplication of Stoic ideas. Taken without nuance, the pursuit of apatheia could be misinterpreted as a demand to suppress or feel ashamed of normal human emotional responses. Modern therapy would view that suppression as potentially harmful, a form of avoidance that can amplify distress in the long run. CBT encourages leaning into difficult emotions with mindful awareness to understand and process them, not to vanquish them entirely. Finally, there is a difference in their underlying worldview. Stoicism is built on a set of propositions about the universe, that it is rational, ordered, and purposeful. Living in accordance with this rational nature is the source of virtue. This is a metaphysical claim, a belief system. Cognitive behavioral therapy is agnostic on such matters. It is a pragmatic, evidence-based technology of the mind. It does not ask you to believe in a rational cosmos, only to test whether challenging your thought, "I am helpless," leads to feeling less helpless. Its authority comes from data, not from divine logos. This is why the analogy, while powerful, has its limits. You cannot simply prescribe Marcus Aurelius's Meditations as a substitute for professional treatment for clinical depression. The philosophy lacks the structured, safety-focused protocols for severe mental health conditions. Conversely, reducing Stoicism to merely a set of anxiety-reducing tips misses its majestic depth as a guide to virtue, community, and our place in the grand scheme of existence. One offers a cure for specific ailments of the mind. The other offers a compass for the entire journey of a human life. Recognizing this boundary allows us to use each for what it does best, applying clinical tools when we are wounded and philosophical wisdom when we seek direction. This synthesis offers something clinical practice alone sometimes cannot, a compelling story about why the work matters. When you understand that the thought record on your kitchen table is a direct descendant of Seneca's evening review, the exercise shifts. It is no longer just a therapist's assignment, a chore to complete for symptom relief. It becomes a link in a chain of human wisdom, a personal ritual connecting you to a 2,000-year-old conversation about how to live with clarity and purpose. The technique remains the same, but its meaning deepens. You are not merely managing anxiety, you are apprenticing yourself to a tradition of mental discipline. This philosophical reinforcement can be a powerful motivator, especially on days when the will to practice feels weak. Sticking with behavioral activation because it is good for you is one thing. Choosing to engage in a valued action because you see it as training in the Stoic virtue of courage, as a small act of aligning your behavior with your character, invests the action with a different kind of weight. It becomes part of a larger project of self-cultivation, a daily brick in the construction of a resilient and virtuous life. This perspective addresses a common challenge in any sustained practice, the question of why am I doing this? When the initial crisis fades, motivation can wane. The clinical answer might be to prevent relapse. The philosophical answer is to become a person who is no longer easily disturbed, to build a character that can meet life's inevitable hardships with equanimity. For many, that second answer carries a deeper, more enduring resonance. It transforms the tools from a temporary repair kit into a lifelong philosophy of maintenance. Consider someone working through social anxiety. In a pure CBT framework, they might expose themselves to a social gathering to reduce their fear response, which is a perfectly valid and effective goal. But framed through a Stoic lens, that same act can also be seen as practicing the discipline of desire, challenging the irrational demand for universal approval, and exercising the justice of participating in community despite personal discomfort. The behavioral outcome is identical, but the inner narrative is richer, tied to the cultivation of strength rather than just the avoidance of weakness. This fusion does not replace therapy, it can fortify it. It provides a narrative container that makes the sometimes dry, mechanical steps of cognitive restructuring feel part of a grand human endeavor. Knowing you are walking a path cleared by philosophers and validated by scientists can instill a quiet confidence. You are not just following a 12-week program, you are learning a skill set that has helped humans navigate suffering for millennia. This can be particularly empowering for individuals who find meaning in history, in legacy, or in connecting their personal struggles to a universal human condition. The homework does not change, but the reason for doing it expands from fixing my brain to training my mind, from being a patient to becoming a student of life. Ultimately, this synthesis points toward a more integrated vision of well-being, where psychological health is not an end in itself, but the foundation for a life of character and engagement. The modern tools give us the precise methods, and the ancient philosophy gives us a compelling reason to use them day after day, long after the therapy sessions have ended. Every powerful tool carries a double edge, and these are no exception. A common and serious criticism leveled at both Stoicism and cognitive behavioral therapy is that they can be twisted into instruments of emotional suppression. The fear is this: if we teach people that their thoughts create their feelings, does that not imply they should simply think differently to avoid pain, effectively telling them to bottle up legitimate grief, anger, or fear? Could this become a sophisticated form of just get over it, placing the entire burden of suffering on the individual while ignoring real-world causes? These are vital questions, and they point to a potential misapplication of the ideas, not to the ideas themselves in their pure form. Both systems, when understood deeply, explicitly guard against this very trap. The goal is never to deny or suppress emotion. It is to understand its source so we can respond to it wisely. A Stoic or a skilled CBT therapist would never tell someone grieving a profound loss to simply change their thoughts and stop being sad. That would be a cruel misunderstanding. Instead, they would guide the person to distinguish between the reality of the loss, which is undeniably painful, and the additional, optional layers of suffering we often add, like the belief that this pain will never end or that a meaningful life is now impossible. The work is to make space for the authentic sorrow while gently challenging the catastrophic story that can wrap around it, amplifying the natural pain into something incapacitating. It is the difference between feeling a deep, aching sadness and being consumed by a narrative that says, "My life is over." Both frameworks aim to preserve the first while softening the grip of the second. Similarly, the charge of victim blaming arises when these tools are clumsily applied to systemic injustice or trauma. To suggest that a person facing discrimination or the aftermath of a violent event simply needs to restructure their cognitions is not only insensitive, it misses the point entirely. Properly administered, neither system asks an individual to pretend an external harm does not exist or that it is acceptable. Stoicism was a philosophy deeply engaged with social duty and justice. Marcus Aurelius spent his life administering an empire, trying to create a more just society. His inner work was meant to fuel right action in the world, not passive acceptance of evil. The dichotomy of control is key here. A systemic injustice is for any one person largely outside of their direct individual control, but what is within their control? It might be their understanding of the issue, their choice to speak out, to organize, to vote, to offer support. The focus shifts from the impossible task of single-handedly eradicating the problem overnight to the possible task of determining a meaningful, virtuous response within their sphere of influence. This is not blame, it is empowerment in the face of overwhelming odds. A modern therapist using CBT with a client affected by systemic issues would follow a similar path. They would absolutely validate the reality and unfairness of the external circumstances. The therapy would not challenge the thought, "This system is unjust," because that is a fact-based appraisal. It would, however, help the client identify and challenge any additional personalized distortions that might arise from that reality, such as, "Therefore, I am powerless," or "This proves I have no value." The work would then focus on building agency, perhaps by exploring values-based actions the client can take, whether that is seeking community support, engaging in advocacy, or developing personal boundaries to protect their well-being while navigating an unfair landscape. The aim is realistic appraisal leading to effective action, not denial. At their core, both traditions are about freedom, not blame. They offer a way out of feeling like a passive receptacle for whatever life throws at you. They provide a map to navigate storms, not a command to pretend the storms aren't real. The misuse happens when the tools are wielded without wisdom, compassion, or context, turning a philosophy of resilience into a prescription for silence. But in their true form, they are allies not to oppression, but to the quiet, steady courage required to face the world as it is and to act within it with clarity and purpose. This lineage transforms therapy from a mysterious medical procedure into a shared human inheritance. It means the techniques on a therapist's work sheet are not proprietary secrets of modern science, but rediscovered patterns of the mind. They are universal principles like the law of gravity for our inner world, observable to anyone who looks closely enough at their own experience. Knowing this history is profoundly empowering. It removes the intimidating veil of clinical jargon and places the power to understand your mind squarely back in your hands. You are not learning a foreign language invented in a lab. You are learning to read the native tongue of your own thoughts, a language philosophers have been translating for centuries. This realization can dissolve the stigma that sometimes clings to seeking help. Struggling with your thoughts is not a sign of being broken or defective. It is the universal human condition. The Roman emperor on his campaign and the modern student facing an exam are both navigating the same cognitive terrain, using variations of the same map. When you see your anxiety not as a unique flaw, but as an ancient puzzle with a well-worn solution, the burden of shame lightens. The challenge shifts from "what is wrong with me" to "which of these timeless tools will I practice today?" This perspective also guards against a passive relationship with healing. In a purely clinical framework, it is easy to slip into the role of a patient waiting for a cure, for the expert to fix what is broken. But understanding that CBT's core is repurposed philosophy reframes you as a student, an active participant in your own growth. You are not merely receiving treatment, you are engaging in a form of mental training, much like an athlete building strength or a musician practicing scales. The therapist becomes less a doctor and more a coach, someone who knows the drills and can spot your form, but who understands that the real work happens in your own daily practice. This is why the history matters. It democratizes resilience. It tells us that the capacity to steady your mind in a storm is not a gift given only to a spiritually enlightened few or a treatment available only to those with a diagnosis. It is a set of skills built on observable truths about how judgment works. You do not need to believe in a specific philosophy or subscribe to a particular school of thought to benefit from them. You only need to be willing to observe the link between your thoughts and your feelings and to experiment with interrupting that chain. That is an experiment anyone can run. The tools are not locked in a therapist's office or buried in a scroll. They are waiting in the space between your ears in the moment you pause and ask, is that thought really true? This connection across time offers a quiet kind of hope. It suggests that our modern struggles with overwhelm, with anxiety about the future, with the critical voice in our head, are not new diseases caused by a fractured world. They are the old, familiar challenges of being human, dressed in contemporary clothes. And if humans have been identifying and working with these patterns for 2,000 years, then the path through them is not a mystery. It is a trail that has been walked before, its landmarks recorded in both clinical manuals and philosophical texts. Your journey is part of that long, continuous story of learning to master the only thing you ever truly can, your own mind. The next evolution of these tools is already taking shape on our smartphones. Countless apps now offer digital journals for thought records, guided meditations for mindfulness, and daily prompts for gratitude or reflection. They package the techniques of cognitive behavioral therapy into sleek, accessible interfaces, available anytime, anywhere. This is a remarkable democratization of mental skills, putting the core mechanics of emotional regulation into millions of pockets. Yet, for all their utility, these apps often present the tools in a vacuum. They are brilliant at delivering the how, the step-by-step exercise, but frequently silent on the deeper why. They offer symptom management, a way to feel less anxious today, but rarely connect that practice to a larger vision of who you are becoming over a lifetime. This is the current frontier, a world of powerful, isolated techniques. The most intriguing possibility for the future lies not in abandoning these digital tools, but in enriching them. Imagine the next generation of this technology, where the exercise is seamlessly paired with its philosophical heritage. You open an app to log an automatic thought, and alongside the prompt to examine the evidence, a short, relevant passage from Marcus Aurelius appears, reminding you that your power lies in your judgment, not in the external event. A module on stress inoculation could be framed not just as anxiety reduction, but as a modern training in the Stoic virtue of courage, preparing you to meet challenges with resilience. This would be a conscious reintegration, a weaving together of the clinical protocol and the wisdom tradition that birthed its insights. The goal would expand from mere symptom management to holistic character development. The app would not just ask, "What thought can you challenge to feel better?" It might also ask, "What value are you honoring by facing this difficulty? How does this small act of courage contribute to the person you wish to become?" This fusion addresses a fundamental human need that pure technique often misses, the need for meaning. We are not just machines that need debugging, we are storytellers seeking a narrative that makes sense of our struggles. A philosophical framework provides that container. It turns the hard work of cognitive restructuring from a clinical chore into a meaningful practice in self-mastery. It answers the question of why we should bother doing these exercises on the days we feel fine, because we are not just preventing future pain, we are actively building a mind that is clear, resilient, and just. In this envisioned future, digital therapy becomes a guide not only to mental health, but to what the ancients might have called a flourishing life. The technology handles the consistent tracking, the reminders, the accessible structure, while the timeless philosophy provides the compass direction. Your progress dashboard might not only show a reduction in anxiety scores, but also trace the growth of your ability to apply wisdom, courage, and temperance in daily life. This is not a return to dusty textbooks, but a forward leap into a more complete form of self-care, one that acknowledges we heal best when we are growing toward something. The tools remain practical and evidence-based, but they are now illuminated by a light that shows their place in the grand, enduring project of becoming human. The journey from the ancient porch to the modern therapist's office is now complete. We have traced a direct line not of academic borrowing but of independent discovery. The most powerful tools in modern cognitive behavioral therapy, the thought records, the cognitive restructuring, the behavioral activation, are not inventions of the 20th century. They are clinical refinements, precise and evidence-based versions of psychological exercises practiced by Stoic philosophers 2,000 years ago. This is the story of a profound human insight, lost and found. The Stoics, through deep introspection and reason, mapped the architecture of emotional suffering. They identified the critical role of judgment, the patterns of distorted thinking, and the disciplines required to master one's inner world. Then, in the middle of the last century, clinicians like Beck and Albert Ellis observed those same patterns in their patients, stripped away the philosophical framework, and subjected the bare mechanics to rigorous scientific testing. What emerged was a validated, replicable treatment. This is the beautiful synthesis, the scientific method confirming ancient wisdom, and ancient wisdom giving depth to clinical technique. It is a story of convergence where two paths through time, one philosophical and one clinical, arrived at the same fundamental truth about the human mind. Our suffering is shaped by our perceptions, and by changing those perceptions, we can change our experience of life itself. This legacy is now yours to explore. You can approach it from either direction, or better yet, from both. Dive into the writings of the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, and discover a complete philosophy for living with resilience and purpose. Seek out evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapy resources, whether through books, reputable online programs, or professional guidance, to acquire the structured skills for managing anxiety and depression. One offers a compass for the entire journey, the other offers a toolkit for repairing the road when it gets rough. Together, they form a complete guide for building a mind that is not easily disturbed, a life of clarity, courage, and quiet strength. The tools have been here all along, waiting for you to pick them up and begin your own practice.